Hi, I read books. So, in today's video we're going to be talking about the death of the slasher film. And I'm going to be utilising, hopefully, my definitive guide to horror movies book that I got for Christmas from my parents. 365 films to scare you to death. Yet one of them is Picnic at Hanging Rock, so I don't really know what the hell they mean. I think it's just, is anecdote? What the hell is it, that word where they just make it seem a bit bigger than... fuck it, I forgot literature. Who cares? There is many different sections to this book, done by James Marriott and Kim Newman. For example, they have the beginnings of horror, the birth of horror cinema, 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. So let's jump to page 304, where they have the 2010s. Pretty much, I want to examine the horror movies, slasher movies in particular, from the 2010s onwards. From 2009 is the earliest date I have. And to see what the hell happened to them. Where did they go? Are they gone forever? 2008, Antichrist, Dead Snow, Drag Me to Hell. I like how they have foreign films in here, it's great. The Road, 2010 May, The Killer Inside Me. Is that a... no. Yeah. They gotta have some kind of a slasher film in here, right? Maybe not. Snowtown, The Woman, Human Centipede, VHS, Mama, Field in England, Oculus, a lot of ghost films. Under the Skin, it's a good film. Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. I haven't seen that one. I heard it was really good. Babadook, It Follows, The Witch, The Wailing, Under the Shadow, A Ghost Story, Get Out, It Chapter 1, It Comes at Night, Mother, and A Quiet Place. And that's it. It ends with A Quiet Place. Interesting. So obviously if I jump to probably the 80s, I could probably find the slasher section. So page 216. Well, there's Jaws. Slashers, here we go. There's a whole section on slashers. Like, well, a whole page on slashers outside of The Evil Dead being there, which is a great film. Bastard cousin of the giallo, serial killer film and psycho thriller, the slasher is generally considered close to the nadir of the already disreputable horror genre, trumped only by the Italian cannibal cycle and mock snuff of Japan's infamous guinea pig series. Early prototypes like Communion and Black Christmas showed verve and originality, but the films that followed the monumental success of Halloween displayed neither, reverting to the formulaic nature of the slasher's other forebear, the Babysitter in Peril TV movie. And it continues to note Halloween, Friday the 13th, My Bloody Valentine, and of course Nightmare on Elm Street, and later Scream. And that's all it says. Like, it's a whole page. It's a nice dedication to it, because of course the slasher genre was huge in the 80s. Of course, technically starting with arguably Communion, but most notably Black Christmas, which is a 1974 British horror film. More or less the point is, slashers became huge because of Halloween. Of course, Black Christmas is technically the first slasher film, though technically Psycho is the first slasher film. Nevertheless, the slasher film genre that we've come to be accustomed with grew famous because of Halloween. You had Halloween, you had Nightmare on Elm Street, you had Jason, the whole Friday the 13th series. There was a whole bunch of slasher films. I'm noting the most famous ones because there are so goddamn many slasher films. There's Prom Night, one of the guy who has a drill. There are so many. Technically Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but I wouldn't really point that as a slasher film. There are so many, and the 80s were big with them. From 78 pretty much to 99, I'd say that was the biggest boom in slasher films. Especially, well, technically it wasn't until maybe 96, I believe that's when Scream came out. That's when the slasher film was able to revitalize itself from just being the tired genre that we'd been experiencing pretty much since 82, 83, because the slasher genre is very conventional. It's very simple. A guy goes around and kills people. That's pretty much it. You have your final girl, you have maybe a mysterious backstory for the villain. It's pretty simple stuff. It's all formulaic, and it was rinse and repeat over and over and over. And it's very disappointing to some degree, especially when you rewatch a lot of these films thinking, geez, are they ever going to try anything new? There are some films that did, something like Sleepaway Camp in particular, I think is a very notable slasher film, and is one of my favourites. But that's also a film that, like, it kept the killer secret, and even their reveal was a great twist, but it was also something that's just completely crazy with how it's edited, so it, like, just, everything seems so random, like there could be multiple killers, there could be just the one, it's so crazy and what the hell's going on. But fundamentally, when you just break it down to its essentials, it's a kid going around killing people. That's pretty much it. That's just like Friday the 13th. And it's at a camp as well, I should mention that. But yeah, so of course, once the late 80s, pretty much once Scream came around, you had this revitalization of the slasher genre, mostly kind of a parody take of it. You know, a self-awareness to it, especially because Scream is most famous for doing that. And Scream continued all the way till 2015, and this is where we start with the 2010s. 2000 to 2009, I can't really say too much about in terms of the horror slasher genre. There wasn't too much of it. They tried with Halloween, that was Halloween H2O, 20 years later, which was 1998. 2001, we saw Halloween Resurrection. Then we saw the Rob Zombie Halloween films from 2007 to 2009. There was Friday the 13th was it Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street that came first? 2009, we had Friday the 13th, which apparently was a pretty decent remake. Still was a film that utilized, CGI and stuff like that. A lot of sex, a lot of nudity. Pretty much, it's the same formula, but we have CGI instead of using practical effects for the most part. I can't completely say what they use because I haven't watched it yet, but I know that it's not hated among the fan base. This isn't Jason Goes to Hell. This is apparently a pretty decent Jason film. And to be honest, once you've watched the first 3 Jason films, or Friday the 13th films, I should say, you pretty much know what you're going to get for the rest of the franchise, so you just kind of hope for something interesting with the kills. And more or less that's what you get throughout the rest of the franchise, depending on which films you watch. My favourite being Jason Lives. That's the best one. In 2010, because of course you would have had as well the Scream films come out, Scream 2 and Scream 3. 2010 you had the Nightmare on Elm Street remake, which everyone fucking hates. Fair enough, I'm never going to watch it, so yeah, I'm taking my colleague's word for it, because he's watching it, he's like, dude, it's not worth it. I can't say they've tried to revitalize the slasher genre, but they're more or less just trying to reutilize it through properties that they already own. This is New Line Cinema still, I believe. Then 2011 comes the final Scream film, and also Wes Craven's final film, which is Scream 4. Which is not a terrible film. I like it. I don't think it's the worst of them, but they're all probably really good films. Like, the first one's obviously a fucking masterpiece. I think the second one or the third one was my favourite. I can't remember. I think the third one is, even though I think it's my favourite just because it's so bizarre and hilarious. And I'm pretty sure, they are more kind of disliked throughout the rest of the series, but Scream 4 kind of rizzed it up a bit. It's like, hey, it's not a bad version, but it's still pretty good. And then we get to, the end of the slashers. There were no really big slasher films for the next 10 years, more or less. Pretty much, you've got Curse of Chucky, which is the sequel to... Oh, well, they did have Cult of... Oh, yeah, I've got Cult of Chucky. So, Curse and Cult of Chucky from 2013 and 2017, respectively. I should probably have posters here. So, Curse and Cult of Chucky. Direct-to-DVD films. Still written and directed by Don Mancini. And, people like them. That's good. Good for you, Don Mancini. You're still making the only property that you've ever been able to make. I don't mind. I like them. I have them on Blu-ray. Not bad. Then in 2015 you have Scream the series, a Netflix show. I just know that we got to watch it on Netflix in Australia. I can't remember if it's actually a Netflix show or not. But I think they made 2 seasons of it, and it was just Wes Craven I think he had something to do with the production of it before he passed away, but I don't think he actually contributed too much to it, but enough, I guess. Obviously, 2017 comes with Cult of Chucky, but then you have something new, something different. Happy Death Day. This is the most pivotal slasher film that's come out pretty much since Scream. And it goes through the same kind of thing. You know, a guy goes around trying to kill one person, sometimes a few others, depending on how it goes, but it mixes it with Groundhog Day. What if you kept getting killed by a killer in a baby mask, because it's a mascot from the school, but every time you got killed, you came back to life and had to relive the day again, over and over and over, until you found who the killer was and stopped them, either killing them or getting them arrested, and then hopefully closing the loop and living your life to a more happy degree. And I quite like it. I think it's a pretty fun film, you know. I don't know anyone who dislikes it, but I know it's not a perfect film. It's fun, you know. It's exactly what you expect. It's a bit scary, yeah, but it's mostly kind of comedic because, like, it still has this air of horror through it, but it's nothing completely, you know, dreadful and scary, which is fine, but it's still arguably, at least I'd say, it's a slasher film because someone's going around slashing and dicing and whatever. Then in 2018, what's that? Is that the sound of Halloween H2O? No, it's H4O actually. Halloween from 2018. Halloween H4O as I call it, because Halloween is a dumb name. We've already used it once before. Why do we need to use it a second time? This is a sequel / reboot continuation to the very first Halloween film from 1978. This is the first really strong indication that the slasher genre is coming back. One guy, Michael Myers, going around slashing, slicing, and dicing. That's pretty cool. You know, it's pretty much exactly what you got from the first film, except more modernized technology for how they can film it. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It's still low enough budget for it to have this nice, quiet feel to it. It's not too over the top. It's nothing like the Halloween films from 2007 and 2009. I personally don't mind the Rob Zombie ones, I just don't like the second one, but still. And so, you know, it looks like the genre is coming back to some degree. You know, you've had Happy Death Day, which is kind of an appeal to it. Halloween is a strong contender. 2019, you've got 3, because I just remembered this one. 3 different slasher films, though they all have varying degree of quality. The first one to mention is Happy Death Day to You, the sequel to Happy Death Day, which is more a time travel comedy than it is anything else. Like, it's a mixture of Groundhog Day, you know, the slasher genre, and like stuff like Back to the Future, which is perfectly fine. You know, it's trying to be more sci-fi, having much more fun, because obviously it did really like well enough at the box office that they can make a sequel with a bigger budget. It's just a fun film. I like it. I think it's fun. Me and my best friend enjoy the hell out of these 2 films. But I think it's lost its slasher touch and just becomes more of a, like, it replicates its slasher feel within the first, like, 20-30 minutes or whatever, but then just becomes a straight-up comedy with some time travel shit, well, not really time travel, but, you know, sci-fi stuff in it, which is perfectly fine. It changes up its genre to make it seem fresher and different to the original, which is perfectly good. It means that it's a loss for the slasher genre, but that's alright, because you also have 2 more slasher films this year. Child's Play, a remake of the original Chucky film that was done by Tom Holland in the early 80s, or late 80s, I can't remember. This one has no contribution by Don Mancini, which is ultimately a disappointment. It's like, hey, this guy who's been making the Chucky films that have been successful throughout the fans, and, you know, whoever, I don't know if it was Universal or whoever the hell did the film, was just hey, fuck you, Don, we're making our own one. You know, we own the IP, we're just gonna make our own version that's gonna be bigger budget, it's gonna be new and fresh, there's new technology, you know, Chucky's more of an android doll than it is a possessed doll, it's just a programming glitch, it's voiced by Mark Hamill. For some fucking reason, it's like, why is it voiced by Mark Hamill? I know he's a good voice actor, but I'm sorry, Brad Dourif is the best? What the fuck movie? It's an okay film. I thought it was decent. I prefer the original because I like the voodoo stuff. I think that shit's hilarious. I love the whole 80s aesthetic to the original. I don't care much for this film. And then, of course, there is the most disappointing of the slasher remakes, Black Christmas. The ultimately, from what I've heard at least, because I don't want to ever watch this film, over-the-top feminist propaganda. Apparently it's fucking terrible, which is fair enough. You know, I don't really think you could remake Black Christmas and get a good film out of it unless you just tried something completely different. Which I think that they may have tried to do, but it just wasn't as effective. There have been a lot of horror remakes of the past 10 years. Again, starting with more or less Friday the 13th, even to the point of having Suspiria, and there's a lot of films. You could arguably say, I don't think it's counts as a slasher film, but it's another horror remake. There are a lot of horror remakes, and the problem is that there hasn't really been any new slasher films. Which, again, if you're really big on the genre, then you probably know that exactly why it died off when it died off. It has had no real reason to come back since 2005. Like, yeah, they had the Halloween remakes, but like as an original film, like the last original good slasher film that I can remember would probably have to be Scream. Like, it did revitalize the genre and you had a lot more meta stuff like that, but overall there wasn't anything as stand out and probably never would be. All the rest that came out was either sequels to films that had already come out, you know, what do you got? Halloween, a lot of Halloween films. Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, you know, remaking the most iconic franchises. And there's an overall, some of them were hits, some of them were misses, but they haven't done anything like, there's no Friday the 13th film sequels post the remake. There's no Nightmare on Elm Street sequels. There are meant to be 2 more Halloween sequels to end this trilogy, which is kind of a quadrilogy when you really think about it. Which is fair enough. It performed exceptionally at the box office, got really good reviews and everything, so everyone was mostly happy with it. But since that came out, there's been no real revitalization of the slasher genre. It's more or less, hey, what's an 80s property that's horror that we can probably remake? You know? And there's been Chucky, which was an okay film, mostly mediocre. And there was Black Christmas? Yeah. I think as an overall, and we're now in 2020 and there's still been no real, like there probably are a lot more other slasher films. Even when I went on IMDb, there's a lot of things that are considered slasher films that are, you know, mostly foreign language films. I would say that the slasher film was mostly definitely mostly in a American-led or British-led genre, but at the same time, the giallo genre exists as well, so Italian slasher films, much like the spaghetti western. But even they don't seem to really exist that often. You probably got more chance to find a giallo film of, you know, recent than a slasher film. And I can't say it's disappointing. The slasher genre is interesting and has survived for a long time, but unfortunately it hasn't survived through originality, it's survived through copycats upon copycats. Which is also the problem when you have a genre that's simply killer hunts and kills people. And the only thing you can change about that is killer maybe is a different changed name, maybe it's a doll, maybe it's, you know, some weird entity, maybe it's something else, you know, this could be an It Follows situation. Is that a slasher film? Not really. but not really. It doesn't have the fundamentals of being someone with a tool or weapon going after and killing people. And then, of course, the people could be teenagers, it could be women, it could be, it could be a fraternity. There are so many different variations of what something could be. And I don't mind the fact that slasher films don't really exist as much anymore. They're mostly just the franchise films like Friday the 13th or Halloween, which is fair enough. They're franchises that have an audience, a dedicated audience since their initial conception, and will continue to have this audience through modern iterations of film goers and horror goers and slasher goers. I like slasher films. I don't particularly find them scary, which is potentially a defeat of the whole idea of it being a horror film, but I am so desensitized to the idea of someone going around with a knife and chopping people up, I'm used to that. I've seen it in a lot of films throughout my many years of watching horror and slasher films. And I don't mind that these films exist. I think it's a benefit for the slasher film to have existed in the 80s and the 90s, back when the low-budget films were hugely popular, back when people just wanted to see blood and guts and gore, back when politics and environmentalism and all this, sexual transmitted diseases and shit, there's all this stuff that's happening in the 80s. You don't want to think about that. You just want to go see someone chop up teenagers. Why is it that hard, especially because teenagers were so big and annoying and still are. God, we need a new slasher film. But also because they didn't have things that would stop them of the past. Like, Halloween had to deal with the fact that we now have cell phones, a lot of people can drive cars. It's not hard to get the hell out of there when you have this kind of a deal, like a modern attraction. But also, slasher films thrived during the VHS era, You'd have a heap of video cassettes releasing these films, and everyone would be able to watch them, and they'd be like, hey, scary Fright Night, let's chuck on this VHS tape of prom night, bowl of popcorn, oh no, it's scary, cheesy shit. And it had its era, and I think its era is dead. There are going to be remakes and reboots, like Christmas, Halloween, etc. Which is just companies being like, hey, let's revive a property. That's it. Because they have no new ideas, so they're just going to revive something. Could be terrible, could be great. Could be Black Christmas, could be Halloween. Simple stuff. Overall, I'd like to see something new come out of the slasher genre, if it were ever to come back. But for now, I don't mind the aesthetic, the look, the feel of the original films. Especially because most of the slasher films that they've been trying to remake are either trying to remake it for more blood and sex and gore, or CGI value to it, or it's a property that's really popular, or I don't know, it's usually always bigger budget stuff to some degree, but it's like, it doesn't work as well when it's bigger budget. Cheap, scary horror films, that's what the slasher is. It's what the slasher thrived as, and it's what the slasher will be remembered for. So, yeah, overall, this has been the death of the slasher film, an autopsy of what's happened in the past 10 to 20 years. There are probably heaps of slasher films that may have come out in the past 10 to 20 years that I haven't mentioned, but overall I'm looking for something that's, got notoriety, something that's, you Google slasher film, boom, this one comes right up because you know exactly what it is. It's like, hey, this one's big, it's popular, whether it's well regarded or whether it's popular or whatever. There could be a lot of foreign language films that have great slasher films that have come out in the past 10 to 15 years. I personally don't know about them, which is unfortunate. And if there are, please, feel free to educate me in the comments. I'd like to know what kind of slasher films have come out that I missed out on, that I haven't been able to watch or haven't heard about. Whether because their budget is so low that they haven't been able to broadcast their nature. And I'm not talking about Blumhouse films. Jesus Christ. So, yeah. Outside of that, thanks for watching. I hope this has been an interesting video talking about slasher films. And that's all I got to say. Feel free to check out my video essay playlist and even my film shelf playlist. And subscribe somewhere around here. And we'll see you next time on Telecreations. Adios.